Great to have you on, Pierre. Great to see that face once again. Obviously, we are a Maple Leafs driven podcast.
Mhm.
So, initially, your thoughts on what the Maple Leafs have done so far this offseason?
I think a lot of familiarity for the general manager. Obviously, Brad Treliving, he knows Oliver Ekman-Larsson from his time in Arizona, and he obviously knows Christopher Tanev from his time in Calgary. And getting Max Domi re-signed was huge for them. I still think they're question marks. I heard what Jay was saying to you before, Nick, and I agree with him. I mean, I like Easton Cowan a lot. I think he's a good player. I like Fraser Minton a lot. I think he's a good player. Those are really, but if you're hanging your hat on those guys being the key to your development and taking the next step this year, I think you're making a mistake. So here's how I look at it. I think one guy can really elevate, and that's Matthew Nyes. And I don't know what Jay thinks about that, but Matthew Nyes to me is a 25 to 30 goal guy, not a 15 goal guy, and I expect he'll go there. Bobby McMahon, I think, probably tapped out at 15. I know Bobby's body of work really well from Colgate before he even got to have a chance to play pro hockey. So, they're guys that I think can go up, and I liked what Jay said before, and I think they're guys that are about where they're going to be. They are what they are. They're not getting better. They're going to stay where they are.
Yeah, and what's your thought on? I know this league's getting younger, and you see these kids doing special things at earlier and earlier in age. But what would be your take on how much experience and how much leash do you give a young guy who's kind of ready and looks really good, and the sky's the limit? But there's also that, like, don't break him, like don't put him in a situation where you get his confidence stripped from him, or he gets down on himself, or he starts to second guess. Like, how do you kind of finesse that a little bit with a player? Or if he's ready, do you just say, go do your thing, kid?
I think you say go do your thing. I'll give you an example, Jay. When I was coaching in Pittsburgh, we had a player come off the U.S. Olympic team named Sean McEachran. Sean played just a few games, less than 1,000, but he played a lot of games. But when he came into the league, we had to throw him in right away because we had a lot of injuries on that team. And eventually he became a really important part of it. So we let him swim in the deep end, but we gave him a life jacket. We didn't beat him down. And I think that's really important when you're dealing with young players that you think are going to be impact players. You can't just pound them into the ground. You got to live with their mistakes, try to make them better. I love what Pat Verbeek did last year in Anaheim with Leo Carlson. That work management type thing where they say, okay, we're going to give you a game here off. We're going to give you 2 games in a row here. And I think that's probably the best way to do it with younger guys, especially. And Jay, you played it, you know it. Playing in a high pressurized environment like Toronto, if you're a young guy and you lose your confidence, it's hard to get back.
Well, that's the thing with this team too. Is you guys talk about some of the younger players to suggest they're just going to come in and be this out of this world stud. I think is a lot to expect, especially when the window to win is right now. But I really like the Tanev pickup for a variety of reasons, Pierre. But among them is Morgan Rielly. I think it's really going to help Morgan Rielly out. Do you think that's the ideal fit there in terms of a pairing?
Oh, I just love what you said. So, I can't believe people didn't talk about this more, Nick. I think that's such a good point that you're raising. People look at Quinn Hughes and say, boy, Quinn Hughes is a really good player. Quinn Hughes, part of why and it's to Jay's point before about with a young player, part of the reason why he's so good, he played with Christopher Tanev in Vancouver. And Tanev was his defensive conscience. He allows him to play more minutes, to play more high-risk hockey. And I think with Morgan, there's going to be less pressure on him. Now he can be more of that player that I think Leaf fans are expecting. So I actually think as long as Christopher stays healthy, that's like he's just such a fearless player. And the shot block and everything else, and they're miles on the odometer. I think everybody knows that. But I thought that was a tremendous pickup. Dallas clearly missed him in the playoffs when he got hurt. They weren't the same team without him. And I've known him for a very long time. I'm a huge fan of the person, huge fan of the player.
Mm-hmm. How about their other pickup in Oliver Ekman-Larsson? At this point in his career, obviously he's done some things, no question about it. What do you think he's got left as far as what role could he take on that he could really succeed at?
I think, Jay, the role that he had in Florida this year is probably perfect for him. So he's playing more in the 5-6 role than the 3-4 role. I think that's probably the best for him. I think he's 33, 34, again, just going off the top of my head. And there's some miles on him. He's been in the league for a while. But the one thing I know about this signing for them, Brad Treliving's fingerprints are all over it. He would know more about this player and this person than anybody else in the Maple Leafs organization. And so there's certain value-added parts to a player being signed. And when the manager is really familiar with the player, I think that helps a lot when you're trying to sell him to your coaching staff and figure out a role for him internally.
How do you feel about the crease? Obviously, there's a lot of potential with Joseph Woll, but I mean, like most goalies in this league right now, he gets hurt a lot. And so they bring in Anthony Stolarz as well. Do you like that tandem?
A lot. So it's interesting because Jay played a year at my Minnesota Duluth, and the first time I saw Stolarz really play in a high pressurized environment, he was playing for Nebraska Omaha in a game against Colorado College. Doc Emmerich and I were actually there broadcasting the game, and then he left from there to go play for the London Knights. And so I've kind of been tracking him ever since, and obviously did a lot of his games when he was playing in the NHL. He's way more athletic than people know. He is gigantic. He's a big human. He does not get hurt, unlike Wall right now at this point. So I do think the tandem's actually better than what they had going into last year. I'm excited for. I don't think goaltending is going to be a problem for Toronto. I don't think the goalie is going to be the issue. I think it's going to be keeping some of the older guys healthy and making sure Nylander gets to 40 goals again or more, making sure Matthews gets to 55 to 65 goals, figuring out what you're going to do with Marner and how the players respond to Craig Berube.
Well, let's go ahead and ask what your thoughts were that. I don't know if the ship's kind of sailed on the Marner train as far as making some kind of a move. Obviously, very difficult to do, not even including the no trade clause, but a lot of moving parts and difficult to make that happen for a lot of different reasons. He's here. He didn't get moved out July 1 or 3rd or 4th. But when you look at the playoffs and this caliber of forwards and this talent level of pure offense, and you look at their numbers with, say, the power play that is just abysmal, what do you do to try to kickstart that? Like, I can't really compare anything else to having this group of forwards, and then you look at their power play numbers in the playoffs at like some percentage that doesn't even sound like you're talking about a power play. It's difficult. Do you just keep mixing it up, trying to find the chemistry somewhere?
Jay, I think it's really important. Berube's really comfortable with Mark Savard, obviously, and they bring him in, and he's probably going to be the stimulus or try to be the stimulus for the power play. He's going to have more options to work with in Toronto. I see people taking shots at him because Calgary's power play wasn't particularly good last year. Yeah. I get that. Different elements. And I'll speak to this from personal experience. I coached a power play in Pittsburgh that had some pretty good players on it. Mario Lemieux, Joe Mullen, Paul Coffey, Larry Murphy, Ronnie Francis. So our power play is in the top 5 all the time. I go to Hartford, and all of a sudden we're like 15 to 17 to 21. And people are like, well, what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. We don't have Mario. We don't have Joey. We don't have Ronnie. We don't have Larry. We don't have Paul. It's a different Kevin Stevens. It's a different power play. Yeah. So this is the first time I think Mark Savard's actually had some major components to work with. The one thing I'd say, and this is just from watching like you guys, a lot of games, the best power plays in the league go through one guy first. One guy's in charge. In Washington forever, it was Nicky Backstrom. I know everybody focused on Ovechkin, but everything went through Nicky Backstrom. You look at all the best power plays. New York, it always went through Adam Fox. You look at all the top power plays. One guy's in charge, and he makes the decisions and starts it all. I don't know why Austin Matthews can't be that guy. I don't know, just to Jay's point about Mitchell Marner, why can't Mitchell Marner be that guy? I don't think Morgan Rielly has to be that guy. I don't think he does. Maybe they do, but I don't think he has to be that guy. So I think, Jay, to your point, it's going to come down to Mark Savard and his vision for the power play.
Really excited to see that. And the one thing I have noticed, which is bizarre because there's so much star power on PP1, is how stagnant they become and how predictable they become. And I think that's the biggest thing to overcome. I think if you're Mark Savard and you think he's going to run that first power play unit, what are you going to do differently? How many different looks are you going to give? And I like that point about running it through a specific guy. And they got multiple guys who could probably take on that role. But we mentioned Craig Berube. Do you like that fit? First and foremost, I thought Sheldon Keefe did an excellent job with this team. It was just time to move on. But do you like the Berube fit in Toronto?
I've known Craig a long time. I'm a big fan. I remember when he was coaching in Philly. Jay might even have been around then when he was in there. Were you, Jay?
Yeah, I played for him.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I think he's learned a lot from starting out when he was coaching in the American League and then the NHL and then moving on. I thought the way he took over St. Louis, and I did every one of their games. The year they won the Cup, 2019, I did every single Blues playoff game from start to finish. He was a masterful motivator. Nick, I heard you say before you were talking about Alexander Steen being on the fourth line. He started the year on the first line.
Mhm.
They moved him down to the fourth line, and they never numbered their lines because sometimes that fourth line would start the game. You know, so numbering your lines back then in St. Louis was a mistake. I think that's how it's going to be in Toronto. You know, some nights your fourth line could be your first line, and sometimes your first line could be your fourth line.
And another thing that just kind of popped up with Berube, and you've been in the Leafs locker room and know what it's like around there. And you know, you lose 2 games in a row, and all of a sudden it's absolute eggshells. Everyone's got a big dark cloud over them. No one wants to smile. All the media's like, can't wait to ask their shitty little question, but they're all tiptoeing to it. It's just this brutal atmosphere. And I think that Craig Berube is a guy that he just doesn't buy into that. He's not a roller coaster. He seems to be up here all the time, and he's just super, super steady. He'll walk into a room when everyone else is like, oh, God, and he'll just say something that they're all like, oh, this guy isn't falling. And he's very solid. He's just a train that he's just, you know what you're going to get. He's not up and down. He's not a yo-yo. You always know what you're going to get, and I think that's really going to serve the Maple Leafs locker room.
That's spoken by a guy that's been in the room. That's what I was just talking about before. There's a consistency to him that matters a lot, especially in a pressurized environment. St. Louis, even though in St. Louis they'll tell you it's a highly pressurized environment, it's not Toronto. It's not Montreal. And so I think Craig will actually handle that really well. There are going to be nights where he's probably going to be gruff, you know, with the media. I don't think, you know, the players are going to know who the boss is. I don't think that's going to be a problem. But, you know, the biggest thing to me is he's going to be that steady train that Jay just talked about. I agree 100%.
Well, moving on, like last thing, I know you're a huge John Tavares fan. He's done great things, and you've followed World Juniors and everything like that. What do you think he's got as far as a role on this team, and how much do you think he can contribute at this point in his career?
So I'm gonna give you a name, and they're different players, but it's a guy that I had the privilege of coaching. When we picked up Bryan Trottier in 1990 from the New York Islanders, Brian was used to playing with Mike Bossy and Clark Gillies, and you know they were one of the top line. You guys are a little younger, but I know you know the lore.
Yeah.
They were one of the top lines in the history of the National Hockey League, especially in their generation. And Brian was the engine that made it go. Gillies was a forward checker. Bossy was a finisher, but Trottier was a guy. When we got him, he wasn't going to play ahead of Mario, and eventually he wasn't going to play ahead of Ronnie Francis. So he goes in the 3-hole, and he dominates in the 3-hole. And what he did more than anything else, and you can talk to any of the players we had in 91 and 92 when we won back-to-back cups, he made it so that guys understood, here's the expectation, here's the level you got to get to. If we're going to win, we're going to do it this way. And everybody bought in. He was the Pied Piper. And that's where I think Johnny could be. Johnny hasn't won like Brian, don't get me wrong. But if you move Johnny to the 3-hole and create the proper role for him, I think Johnny could be an elite player in that position. Forget what he makes. Don't pay attention to the money.
It is
Don't
what it
even
is.
look at the money. Just play him in the 3-hole, and you watch how important he is to the team.
You talk about somebody even keel as well. I covered JT and Junior when he was with Oshawa and specifically with the London Knights. He just doesn't change. And it's funny, Pierre, starting this conversation today, we teed you coming on. I actually met you for the first time at the Ottawa World Junior. Do you see where the World Junior is this year again?
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
It's all right. I like it. You know, I'll tell you a John Tavares story. In 2007, I was with Team Canada. We were going over to Russia, and Brent Sutter was the coach. And he's, as you know, from Alberta, Jay, Brent Sutter is a tough son of a gun. He is a tough son of a gun. And he didn't like practice one day, and they were practicing at the Soviet Wings Arena in Moscow. So Brent got really mad at Tavares because he turned the puck over. So he made the guys all line up a stick length away from the boards. And he said, Johnny, skate down the boards without the puck. And he told every guy, you make sure you hit him. So he skated the gauntlet in Russia, in Moscow. And there were probably 2,000 people in the building watching practice, and they were mortified. They're like, what's wrong with this guy?
And they're running him through the gauntlet.
Johnny never complained. He didn't whine. He didn't moan. And he was a dominant. That Canadian team won 7 of the 8 games against a really good Russian team. And the one game they didn't win, it was a tie. And so Johnny was a big leader on that. And eventually they went and played the World Junior in Czech Republic that year, and Johnny was a critical component to that team. So I don't know. I'm a huge fan of Johnny, and I just think, you know, don't look at the money. Don't look at how much he makes.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosehill. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.